Director of the Mexico Office of Border Health. She lived in Venezuela for 20 years and in Thailand for 4, where her work included establishing free clinics in underserved areas, providing medical care, community development, and coordination for internally displaced and refugee populations. Small overview, we got together and talked about this issue that face so many of our children in the border area of all refugees and those who live here in the border and children and adults. So we're going to have a great evening. So if the panel participants would just go ahead and come up, I'll call you real quick and I'll go back and introduce and give a little back. So we've got Myra Garcia, Santiago Huecay, Daniel Escondrias, Rafa Aguilera, and Stephanie Gonzalez, and our panel, as they're coming up, we'll tell you a little bit about each again. Myra Garcia is a college assistant professor and licensed clinical social worker. Way better. She received her bachelor's in social work from the University of Texas at Austin and her master's in social work from New York University. Following New York, Myra primarily served the Latin community, dealing with mental health stressors, and implemented the programs to aid survivors of gun violence in East Harlem. In addition to teaching in the borderland, Myra provides specialized therapy to survivors of trauma, such as child-parent psychotherapy, trauma-focused CBT parent-child interaction therapy, and eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. So ready, Myra. Santiago Huecay is the manager of government relations at Save the Children Action Network, focused on Central American migration. Originally from Ecuador, Santiago moved to New York City as a child. After majoring in political science at CUNY in Baruch, he went on to study international and global affairs at Harvard's Kennedy School, where he received his master's in public policy. After spending a summer working for Save the Children in Germany, Santiago wrote his master's thesis on the impacts of migration mechanisms on child protection standards in the European Union. Prior to graduate school, he worked in the NYC Business Integrity Commission, fighting corruption and organized crime. Daniel Escondrias, so there we go. Obtained her Juris Doctorate from New York University School of Law and is a licensed attorney in the state of Texas. As an attorney for Catholic Charities of Southern New Mexico, Daniel handles deportation and special immigrant juvenile status cases. Yaha Aguilera is the site director for the Las Cruces Asylum Shelter. She's originally from Mexico, and Yaha has a double major in graphic design and advertising from the UTEP, University of Texas at El Paso. She has always had a passion for social work and using her degree as a voice and platform for those whose voice can't be heard. Stephanie Gonzalez. She is the Las Cruces Children's Coordinator for Save the Children and Border Servant Corps. She is born and raised in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and is a New Mexico State University alumni, where she earned her degree in arts and sciences, psychology, the emphasis in psychology, right? Along with 2 minors. She is currently working on her master's in clinical social work at the Catholic University of America. Stephanie has been working with refugee families since January of 2009. So I'm not going to translate any of this. If any of y'all want to know more about these, come to me and I'll be happy to translate this for you. So we got a packed hour, okay, so let's get going. Ok, muy bienvenidos a todos y vamos a estar hablando con el panel y vamos a hacer unas preguntas, luego vamos a oír de su experiencia, okay? So, and Barbara, I would like to do about half of these, and then we need to go to questions in the audience. You know, kind of help me on this one, get to know where I saw Jeff's sign, waving, and that must be if I don't pay attention. Okay, there we go. So the first question is for Myra. Please tell us of your experience in child mental health and explain broadly what childhood trauma is and how it can have a lifelong impact.
So part of the work.
One mic, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I was going to project. So I'm really excited to be here and to talk a little bit about my experiences in childhood mental health, not just in the borderland, but all over the US. Part of my work has been done in Austin, in New York City, and then here in El Paso and Las Cruces. Part of what I focused on over the last few years is really specializing in trauma and working with children and adolescents and families. The youngest that I've ever worked with was 2 years old. I'm trained to work with younger, and the oldest has been way older than 2 years old. Part of the work that I'm doing now is really focused around providing support to families who have been impacted by the shooting at Walmart, and then also working with some of the immigrant children that have been successful in coming over seeking asylum, which we know is very rare. So being able to see some of those things and the mental health repercussions has been a very unique experience that I don't think a lot of social workers and a lot of other people get to have unless they're in this region. So to understand childhood trauma, you have to understand how we naturally respond to stress without the trauma. Whenever we are threatened or we're in danger or there's a perceived sense of danger, we have biological responses that automatically turn on to help us survive. This is when our stress response system sends signals of fight, flight, or freeze, and then we respond and we deal with the situation and we're able to regulate and we use our supports, and then we go about our day.
You need to stop and let somebody translate a little bit, unless you speak Spanish and you translate for yourself.
I can translate.
Okay, then if you want to finish and then just go back and do this in Spanish, you can do that.
I can do that.
Yeah.
So that's our typical response to stress and to perceived threat. When somebody experiences trauma or some type of adverse event, that stress response system turns on and we react, and there's either fight, flight, or freeze. When the trauma happens, that part of our brain is unable to turn off. So what that means is that even when there's no perceived threat, when there's no actual danger, or we're not in need of those survival skills, that part of our brain is still rushing and it's working. And so what that means for children is that the other parts of the brain that are supposed to be developing cognitively, emotionally, interpersonally, they're not where they need to be, because the prime focus is survival. Long-term effects of that can also mean that poor health outcomes long-term, because when that stress response system turns on, the body is rushed with cortisol. And our body is not used to being rushed with cortisol all the time, but that's what happens when we experience trauma. When you think about what that looks like for a child, it means inability to focus in the classroom, inability to focus on healthy relationships, and especially a really hard time being able to regulate and express emotion. So I'll go ahead and translate in Spanish. Para entender cómo trauma afecta a los niños, tenemos que entender cómo trauma afecta el estrés, cómo el estrés naturalmente nos afecta a nosotros. So, cuando estamos pensando en estrés normal o estrés típico, nuestro cerebro funciona de una manera para ayudarnos a sobrevivir ese momento. Manda señales a nuestro cuerpo y a nuestra forma de pensar qué es lo que podemos hacer para sobrevivir. Pero después de que ese estrés pasa, esa parte de nuestro cerebro se apaga y ya no necesita que estar funcionando. Cuando alguien pasa por algo traumático, esa parte de nuestro cerebro se queda prendido. Y es cuando vemos que niños, no es posible para niños poder enfocarse en otras cosas de su desarrollo porque solo está enfocado su cerebro en los métodos de sobrevivir. So, vemos que siempre están alertos, están pendientes a su alrededor, no se pueden enfocar en sus estudios, en las relaciones, y emocionalmente tienen más dificultad para controlarse y expresarse. So, vemos que en realidad en este punto de su desarrollo es muy importante que niños tengan las cosas positivas como a sus padres, a sus familias, para poder enfocarse en las cosas típicas de desarrollo. Pero cuando ese trauma ocurre, no pueden usar esas estrategias y no pueden llegar a ese punto que necesitan como niños.
Okay, thank you. Great. So the next question is for
Yaha, Stephanie, and Daniel. La pregunta es Yaha, Stephanie y Daniel. You all have been working directly with asylum seekers. Please share a story of a family you have met that has resonated with you. So I'll go down the list. So, la pregunta es, ¿todos ustedes han trabajado directamente con los que están buscando asilo? Por favor de compartirnos una historia de una familia que conociste, que se resonó la situación. Okay, yeah.
You want to translate for yourself?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
So by the end of October, we were getting only Mexican families. And there was this family that it was composed by a mom and 2 children. So the oldest was 5 years old and the baby was a year and a half. They came through the port of entry in Ciudad Juarez. And when they came, I don't know if you guys are familiar, but they came and they got separated. So the dad went through a different place than the mom and the kids. So they stayed there for a couple of days. And then when we got them, the mom was telling me that she couldn't stop crying for several days because of the dad. You know, they got separated. And the oldest boy just saw her, she was so, you know, like crying and she couldn't stop, that the boy was just told her, Mom, just stop crying. We're enjoying this vacation and we're having some time to play outside in the sun and we're just together. And so she, you know, she was so surprised that she was just shocked and she was just shocked, and the boy was normal. So in that case, he was just trying to take care of his mom. And we had a board at the asylum shelter where we would ask every kid what they wanted to do in this country in their future. And they will draw like a cloud and we put it in the sky that we had there. And he wrote that he wanted to see his dad for the next time. So in Spanish is una de las familias que recibimos de México, como antes eran centroamericanos y ahora empezamos a recibir mexicanos. Cuando la familia cruzó por el puerto de inmigración de las Américas, los separan. El papá se fue a un centro de detención y la mamá y los niños terminaron en el asilo con nosotros. Entonces, cuando yo le pregunté a la mamá qué había pasado con el papá, ella me contó esta historia donde ella no paraba de llorar por la separación de su esposo, y el niño mayor, con 5 años, solamente le dijo, mamá, ya para de llorar, estamos disfrutando las vacaciones, nos toca un poquito de sol durante el día y estamos juntos. Y la mamá, fue tanto su shock que paró de llorar, ¿no? Y se tranquilizó un poco. Pero el rol que tomó el niño de decir, tengo que hacer algo por mi mamá porque, o sea, no puede seguir así. Entonces, ellos estuvieron unos días con nosotros y en el asilo nosotros tenemos como un pizarrón donde hicimos un cielo con un zacate y les preguntábamos a los niños qué es lo que ellos querían hacer en un futuro en este nuevo país. Y este niño escribió que lo que él quería era ver a su papá otra vez algún día, porque ellos pues no saben cuándo. Y ahí todavía tenemos esa nubecita que él dibujó.
Stephanie.
Hello. So one of the stories that I encountered it really impacted me was there was this little boy, the age of 5. They came on a Friday, and a volunteer and I worked Saturday. And this little boy was very hypervigilant. He was looking around and just very anxious, and sometimes he would slam toys just really hard. And Mom was very patient. She would tell him, okay, be careful with toys. What happens if you're very aggressive with toys? And he would say, well, there would be no more toys. Like, he would break them. And so Mom was like, exactly, so you gotta be nice to the toys because others play with it. So he kept continuing playing. He was very, very fun to be with and see him play. And Mom told me a story of what he witnessed and probably an explanation to his anxiety, to his just very detailed and looking at everything. So they originate from Chiapas, from Mexico, and he was going on a regular day at school. When he went to school, all his classmates were there, and all of a sudden, these bad guys, that she referred to them as bad guys, came in and started taking all the children. He reacted and he hid behind the backpacks. They're in their class, they would hang the backpacks. So he hid right behind them. And so as they were taking the kids, he witnessed the teacher being killed and dismembered, as well as one of his little classmates was forcing herself from going with this guy, and I guess he got impatient and killed the little one as well. So he witnessed pretty much everything until authorities arrived. They found him right behind the backpack. So then at the border, he seemed very also anxious, but he was very brave. He's very, you would look at this kid and you would think that he never experienced such a thing. So it was just amazing to see and witness that on that Monday, because they stayed for a few days, that Monday he seemed so happy. He was flying kites really high, very high in the sky. He was just always there playing with the kids. His cousin had arrived that weekend as well, so he was very happy. And I believe so that he left very distressed and very calm and happy. So en español, la historia, había un niño que vino de Chiapas, México, y este niño era muy imperativo, todo veía, se fijaba en cada detalle. También era muy ansioso, andaba como agarrando los juguetes y golpeándolos. Entonces mamá era muy paciente y él le decía, mijo, cuidado con los juguetes, ¿qué pasa si eres así muy agresivo con ellos? Y decía el niño, pues no habría ya más juguetes. Entonces cuídalos porque otros juegan con ellos. Entonces el niño muy lindo, ya después jugando como si nada y muy feliz. Y la mamá me contó una historia de lo que él fue testigo en su país de origen. Fue a la escuela como cualquier otro día y en uno de esos días pues entraron los malos, que así se refirieron a ellos. No estoy segura si fueran qué tipo de malos eran, pero entraron y se estaban llevando a todos los niños de la clase. Entonces él reaccionó y se fue detrás de las mochilas. Allá en México, pues creo que en esa clase colgaban las mochilas atrás. Entonces él se escondió atrás y él fue testigo de su maestra, la mataron y la cortaron, todo, y luego una niña, una compañera de él, estaba forzándose que no, y pues yo creo que el malo no tuvo la paciencia y la mató ahí en medio de la clase. Entonces este niño pues estaba atrás y entonces en cuanto llegaron las autoridades, pues lo encontraron ahí atrás, escondido. Entonces, cuando estaban ya en custodia, ahí en la frontera, pues él era muy lindo, muy atento, pero muy tranquilo para la mamá. Y la mamá tan paciente que era, en verdad, muy paciente la mamá. Y cuando llegaron acá, pues volamos a papalotes, jugábamos mucho. Entonces yo digo en verdad que se fue muy estresado ya, feliz, sonriente y me acuerdo cuando se fue y adiós, muy feliz.
Daniel. Are you gonna need a translator for this?
I will have a translator just.
Okay.
I get nervous in Spanish.
That's fine. If you're gonna do that, can one of you sit with her and give them only 1 or 2 sentences at a time? Okay.
So I'll talk about a case that wasn't actually my case, that I just was witness to, because I think that it's very emblematic of what we see in immigration court too often.
Yo estaré platicando de un caso que no fue mi caso, pero fui testigo de ese caso y creo que es un caso que representa muchos de los casos que vemos hoy en corte.
So only about 14% of detained clients have representation. And that's because it's moves too quickly and it's takes a lot of resources in order to adequately prepare people for their hearings.
Solamente 14% de los casos representados tienen representación legal. Esto es porque el proceso o pasa muy rápido o necesitamos muchos recursos para poder dar toda esa representación legal.
So I was sitting in the back and there was a woman and she went up to the judge and he had given her 1 continuance in the past. And he asked her if she was ready to submit her asylum application and she said no, she did not have an attorney. And in order to submit a packet, you have to translate all documents in English. She didn't speak English, she was from Venezuela, I believe.
Hubo un caso en particular de una mujer de Venezuela que estaba enfrente de un juez y el juez le preguntó que si estaba lista para enviar su aplicación para asilo y ella le dijo que no, ya no estaba preparada. Tenemos que considerar de que esta aplicación tiene que ser traducida completamente en inglés y esta mujer no hablaba inglés y no tenía representación legal.
So the judge told her that he was not going to give her another continuance and that she needed to proceed and she did not have her asylum application and he was going to have to order her removed, meaning and send her back to her home country.
El juez no le admitió una continuación. Le dijo que esta sería su única oportunidad para poder meter la aplicación.
And she begged him to give her 1 more chance and he refused. And she started crying and screaming that if he sent her back, her husband was going to kill her. And he said, too bad, and he deported her. And they had to practically drag her out of the courtroom screaming and crying.
Después de implorar y de llorar y de gritar y decirle que si por favor le daba la oportunidad de volver y remeter su aplicación, el juez le dijo firmemente que no, y ella le advirtió que si la mandaba otra vez a su país de nacimiento, que su esposo la mataría, y le dijo eso en llanto, y el juez de todos modos le dijo que no. Ella, básicamente tuvo que sacar a la mujer de la corte llorando y gritando porque le acababan de negar su caso.
And then afterwards, the next attorney went up and the judge and the attorney were just chatting and laughing like nothing had happened. And that's pretty indicative of what you see in court on the regular. Most people do not have representation and they're required to translate documents, they're required to represent themselves. And all the judges, I think, over time just become kind of callous to what's happening.
Después de ese caso entró otro abogado y el abogado y el juez continuaron la conversación como si nada hubiera pasado. Eso es algo que te da escalofríos, o sea, al pensar de que pudieron continuar sin que la ocasión les afectara en nada. Pero otra vez, mucho de lo que vemos en estos casos, no... Tenemos que considerar que esta gente no tiene representación legal y de todos modos se les requiere que traduzcan documentos, que vayan a la corte y se tienen que representar solos.
Thank you. So the next question is for Santiago. What dreams worked to stand on this particular issue? Esa pregunta es para Santiago. ¿Cuál era de ese trabajo de scan que le llamó la atención para trabajar en este asunto en particular?
Do you want to translate for yourself or do you want to
Yeah, I
translate?
can translate. Good evening, everyone. As was mentioned during my introduction, I'm originally from Ecuador. My family moved to New York City when I was 9. We came here legally, and we submitted an application for residency. Unfortunately, we were victims of legal fraud. They made my 1-year-old brother the head of the household. And so our application was denied. We overstayed our visas. Luckily, I was in New York City, which is a city that is very receptive and helpful towards undocumented immigrants like myself. So I was able to go to college there. I was a DACA recipient. Eventually, my parents decided to move back to Ecuador. They were not allowed to come back to the country for 10 years. But at that time, I was already in college, and I said, you know what, my life is here. I'll see you in 10 years, which was an extremely difficult decision, but I'm glad I took that decision. After that, I was able to get my papers, and now I'm a legal resident. I was able to go through my mom's application. It's a whole long legal thing. But eventually, when I got my papers, I decided to apply to grad school, and I was lucky enough to get into Harvard, and I said, this is a perfect opportunity. I want to study migration. I want to study human rights. And during that time, I interned for Save the Children in Germany, and I was doing very similar work to what I'm doing now, which is looking at the way that countries basically pass on their migration responsibilities to other countries. And after graduation, I decided to continue working on this. Save the Children Action Network had actually just started a position working here in the border. And I know I'm one of the lucky ones that was able to stay in this country and take full advantage of its opportunities. And I just decided I have to give back, and it's something that I will continue fighting for. And I'm glad that I was given this opportunity with Save the Children. Bueno, mi historia, como fue ya dicho antes en mi introducción, yo soy de Ecuador. Por varias razones, mi familia se quedó en Estados Unidos ilegalmente, y mi familia decidió regresar a Ecuador, pero yo en ese momento ya estaba en la universidad, y bueno, fui básicamente separado de mi familia por casi 8 años, hasta que tuve la oportunidad de recibir mi residencia y pude regresar a ver a mi familia. Y en ese momento dije, bueno, esta es mi oportunidad para seguir mis estudios. Tuve la gran oportunidad de ir a Harvard, y ahí seguí estudiando Derechos Humanos, Inmigración, y tuve la oportunidad de hacer una pasantía con Save the Children en Alemania y estudiar esos asuntos migratorios y de derechos humanos. Y Save the Children Action, la acción de red de Save the Children, abrió esta nueva posición para trabajar en asuntos de aquí del borde y de migración en Centroamérica. Y bueno, yo sé que yo soy uno de los que ha tenido mucha suerte, y quiero usar mis oportunidades para poder seguir ayudando a la gente que ha estado en situaciones parecidas a la mía. Y por eso estoy aquí.
Thank you.
So the next question is for Danielle. Danielle, can you provide us with an update on the latest policies impacting children at the border? This is your note, an overview of NPP and its impact, with a brief description of family separation and detention that has occurred. La pregunta para Daniel es que ella nos va a actualizar en cuanto a las leyes que están impactando a los niños en la frontera, especialmente hablando de eso de quedarse en México y cómo eso está afectando a los niños.
So I guess I'll start with NPP. NPP requires people who present themselves at a port of entry to stay in Mexico while their proceedings are taking place. So right now, 2 of our non-detained judges retired. So those are the judges who are seeing the people who are staying, remain in Mexico, as they call it, they refer to it.
Let her translate for
Ahorita corrientemente hay dos jueces que se retiraron y esos son los jueces que ven la población de...
And the result is that the courts are very clogged right now.
Ahorita los resultados están estancados.
So people are waiting up to a year. I have a client who came in, I believe, in June of this year, and his final hearing is until February of next year.
Hay gente que está esperando más de un año. Tengo un cliente que entró en junio de este año y no será visto hasta febrero del año que entra.
So the majority of these people are in families. So the way that this affects kids, it means that we have children who are stuck with their parents in Mexico.
Tenemos que recordar que estos clientes son partes de familias, entonces para entender cómo afecta a los niños es de que estos niños están con estos padres en México.
And they're there undocumented, they don't have access to education, they don't have access to medical care. Many times families don't have a place to stay because the shelters they have too many people. So we're talking about families living on the street.
Estos niños no tienen acceso a educación, a ayuda médica, no tienen recursos necesarios para sobrevivir y no tienen pues, los derechos en México porque están indocumentados.
As far as the child separation policy, officially, it doesn't exist. Unofficially, it's still happening.
Oficialmente, según esto, la separación de familias ya no existe, pero en verdad todavía está ocurriendo.
Thank you. So the next question is for Myra. Myra, how have these policies contributed to childhood trauma? La pregunta es para Myra. ¿Cómo han contribuido al trauma de niños estos policies?
Myra, sorry.
It's okay.
I looked at your tag and that's not you.
It's okay. It's hard to say. So when we think about these oppressive and inhumane policies and their impacts on children's mental health and how they're traumatic, I think it's important to think about the trauma that children might have already experienced that prompted them to come over here to begin with. So when you think about asylum seekers or other migrants, and as we heard in some of the stories, what forces them to come here is because they've already experienced something traumatic in their native countries. And so that leaves them vulnerable and at risk to experiencing other things. And when they come over in the hopes of living the American dream or being able to be safe, and they encounter that they have to stay in Mexico and often don't have shelter, food, or that they come and they're separated from their caregivers, or they're separated from the people that they traveled with, it's a really big recipe for disaster for those kiddos, especially if they're already in survival mode. When you think about this idea of children hoping to come to the US to be safe, we think about what they imagine and what they think it'll be like. And then to get here and realize that the consequences are no shelter, no food, I'm cold. We know that the temperatures are dropping. A lot of them that are in Juarez right now have to be outside in the cold. It almost just validates that survival mode that's turned on. So as I mentioned before, that switch in our brain that's focused on survival mode is there to help us when we're in danger. So what happens when these kiddos see that they're in danger and that they're not getting their needs met, even when they come here? So that leaves them at risk for mental health issues, emotional health issues. But that's not to say that they're not resilient. Children have an inherent sense of resilience. if they have their caregivers, if they have support systems, if they have their basic needs met. But what we're encountering with these children is that that's being ripped away from them. So what we're seeing, or what I've seen, is that children that are able to be reunited with their families after these detentions, I've seen a few, and while they're very resilient, it takes a lot for them to recover emotionally and mentally and psychologically. Being ripped away from their families or being stuck on the street and not having their basic needs met leaves a lasting imprint on them, especially when they think about what does it mean to be in the US? What does it mean for me to be in the US? And that's when we think about the oppressiveness of these policies, and not just on emotional mental health, but also identity for these kiddos. What does it mean for them growing up, knowing that they had to experience these things to be able to stay here? And so I'll go ahead and translate in Spanish. So cuando pensamos sobre estas pólizas que son opresivas y le quitan los derechos a estas familias, tenemos que entender que la mayoría del tiempo están huyendo de sus países porque ya han pasado por algo traumático en esos países y en sus comunidades. Y vienen con las esperanzas de poder tener seguridad y poder tener tranquilidad y poder tener algo estable. Pero cuando pensamos en estas pólizas que dice que las familias tienen que esperar en México o que tienen que estar separados de sus familias cuando están en la frontera, vemos que estas ideas de seguridad y de tranquilidad se van. Y los niños se encuentran en una posición que tienen que enfocarse en sobrevivir de nuevo. Tienen que enfocarse en qué voy a comer, en dónde voy a vivir. Y sabemos que ahora que están bajando las temperaturas en nuestra área, cómo me voy a quedar, cómo voy a tener algo para estar, poder descansar y poder dormir y poder vivir. También lo que vemos es que la salud mental de estos niños empeora, porque están huyendo de algo traumático, nomás a venir a la frontera, a pasar por algo más traumático, ¿verdad? Y esa esperanza de seguridad y que van a mejorar las cosas no se sienten o no lo ven. En mi experiencia, cuando se reúnen los niños con sus familias después de ser separados, hay muchas consecuencias a la salud mental. Vemos que los niños no pueden dormir, no pueden enfocarse en las cosas de niños porque su cerebro otra vez todavía piensa que tienen que estar pendiente a su seguridad y que están a riesgo a que las cosas empeoran. Estas pólizas lo que en realidad está haciendo es diciéndole a estos niños que huyen de algo traumático solo para llegar a algo más traumático y a veces les quita la esperanza. Pero también quiero decir que los niños tienen muchas fortalezas y enseñan mucha resiliencia con el apoyo de la comunidad, con el apoyo de trabajadores aquí como todos nosotros y con la comunidad como ustedes. Si hay personas presentes que pueden dar esa esperanza y que pueden pelear por ellos, eso es lo que va a ayudar a estos niños a poder superar la trauma que han pasado en la frontera.
And the last question for the panel, and we're going to open it up to the audience. The last question for the panel is for Santiago. What legislation has been introduced to address some of the situations described by Danielle? And how can the audience advocate for children at the border? ¿Cuál legislación ha sido introducida para responder a estas situaciones que describe Daniel? ¿Y cómo podemos nosotros abogar por los niños en la frontera?
So with Save the Children Action Network, we're focusing on 3 main areas of legislation that has been introduced to protect children. The first one is dealing with child welfare. So that's what we're we've all experienced family separation, children in detention, the Flores standards, which provide standards of hygiene, standards of health. And then the next area is dealing with access to asylum. So that's dealing with MPP, the asylum ban, metering, as well as legal representation and access to translation services and stuff like that. And the final area that we're focusing on is root causes. There's lots of legislation that has been introduced. Some of it has passed the House, some of it has, well, I don't think any has passed the Senate just yet. But I did want to highlight Senator Udall's bill, the humanitarian standards for individuals in CBP custody. The companion bill in the House did pass. So one of the actions that you can take is encourage, well, you have options in your folder. First, to thank the senator for their action, but also you could call other members or your representatives to pass this legislation. Obviously, with the political climate, it's very difficult for any legislation to go through, even if it is bipartisan. So some of the actions that you could take are more focused on the local level. So obviously, volunteering and working with some of the shelters and some of the communities that you have here locally is one of the best ways that you can help children in these situations. Bueno, hay tres áreas que está enfocada Save the Children. La primera es la protección de los niños, asuntos de detención, asuntos de separación de las familias. La siguiente área es el acceso al asilo y la representación legal y el acceso a traducción y sí, a representación legal. Y la última área que estamos enfocada es las root causes, las causas que, perdón.
El fondo.
Sí, las causas por las cuales se da la migración y esos asuntos de violencia y pobreza en esos países de Centroamérica. Ha habido mucha legislación que ha sido, que ha pasado a la Casa, pero no necesariamente el Senado. Y bueno, en esa época política y en el clima político en el que estamos, va a ser muy difícil que haya legislación que pueda proteger a los niños, pero la forma que pueden ayudar a los niños también es trabajando en asuntos locales, haciendo voluntariado con bastantes de los shelters que están trabajando aquí y al final del día haciendo incidencia política, pidiéndole a sus representantes y a sus senadores que pasen la legislación que haya sido introducida para proteger a los niños.
Thank you. It's not an easy task right now.
No, it's not.
Okay, so we're about the halfway point and we're gonna open up questions and comments from the audience. This is your time now. If you have anything you want to ask, you've got a good panel of here, folks who work from every level, all the way down to the shelter itself, all the way up to